right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining the web forum today. I know that from the people who have announced themselves, we have a number of folks on the line already who have been participating on the web forums right along, so we really do appreciate you taking the time to join us again as we start our third web forum to help us narrow down the focus of our patient-centered research agenda for personalized medicine. I'm Cynthia A, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Public Policy here at the Personalized Medicine Coalition. I'm also serving as the project lead for this engagement award project that we received from Corey. And I'm joined by my colleague David Davenport, who many of you are also familiar with. He serves as the Manager of Public Policy here at the Personalized Medicine Coalition and is the project manager for the Engagement Award project. David's done a great job with making sure that all of you stay continually engaged in the project, and he and I are going to co-lead the call today. So I'm going to go ahead and run through our agenda for the day, and David and I are going to share responsibilities for going through this. We're going to start with some instructions on how we expect you all to be able to participate actively in the discussion today. Those of you who are on Web Forum 1 and 2 know that we had a functionality for virtual participation, but today we are going into uncharted waters and allowing the ability for all of you to speak freely over the course of the next 90 minutes. So we appreciate your cooperation with that, and we'll do our best to manage any sort of interruption. We are going to go through a little bit of background on PMC and the PCORI project in general. We know that there are at least 5 people who are on the web forum today who are new to the project, and a couple of folks are less familiar with personalized medicine as a concept in their disease area, so we'll work through that. And then we'll walk through the feedback that we received via the participant survey for our last forum, and we'll talk a little bit about the takeaways from that. And then we'll move into a description of some of the objectives and expectations we have for the web forum today and why we're really hoping that you all participate actively. You've been very helpful to us in helping us prioritize what we're considering to be sort of the principles and parameters for what our patient-centered research agenda will look like. So we're going to go through some of the major takeaways we've compiled from web forum number 1 and 2 and give another opportunity for some additional feedback if there are ways that you think that we should be taking other considerations into account as we move forward with our final web forum. And then we're going to gather your feedback as to anything else that you think that we should include and how we can make this more useful to you and to your organizations. And then at the very end, we'll leave a little bit of time. We have 90 minutes to play with, so give you some time to just bring anything up that you think is related, and then we'll walk through the next steps for the project. So with that, I'll turn it over to David to walk through the web forum instructions.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. To facilitate an active discussion, we are using a separate teleconference line today for the audio portion that will allow you to unmute your own line. Your lines are currently muted. However, when we move to the discussion period, you can unmute your line to speak by pressing 4* on your phone. During the discussion period, we will remute all lines when you move on to a new question or start to get any feedback on the call. If you wish to come off mute again, you can do so by pressing 4*. When you speak, please announce yourself and be willing to share the mic with others. Your Webex Q&A function is also enabled for you to ask questions in the webinar portion, and this can be found in the sidebar on your screen. If you need any technical assistance during today's web forum, please contact me through the Q&A feature on the webinar or email me at ddavenport@personalizedmedicinecoalition.org. Just so you know, we are recording this web forum and it will be archived for future viewing and dissemination. Archives for previous web forums can be found on the PMC website, and you will be redirected to this page after you exit the webinar portion. For those of you on the line who aren't PMC members, we've been around for 15 years and have 230 members spanning the healthcare spectrum, including hospitals, patient advocacy organizations, pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies, trade associations, a payer, and other key stakeholders. Our coalition came together to promote the understanding and adoption of personalized medicine concepts, services, and products to benefit patients and the healthcare system. While many of you have heard of personalized medicine before, we tend to get the question a lot, so I want to set the stage and share how we at PMC define personalized medicine. Personalized medicine, often referred to as precision medicine, is an evolving field in which physicians use molecular diagnostic tests to determine which medical treatments will work best for their patients. As part of our definition, we also include combining the data from those tests with an individual's medical history, circumstances, and values so that healthcare providers and patients can develop targeted treatment and prevention plans. In general, some of the benefits of personalized medicine are that it can shift the emphasis in medicine from reaction to prevention. It can direct targeted therapy and reduce trial and error prescribing. It can reduce adverse drug reactions by identifying patients who are likely to experience them and determine the optimal dose. In some cases, and it can increase patient adherence to treatment. It can reduce high-risk invasive testing procedures, and in some cases, personalized medicine can help control the overall cost of healthcare by reducing unnecessary care. PMC is trying to advance the delivery of the benefits that can come from personalized medicine, but in reality, there is a lot of knowledge that needs to be gained to deliver these benefits consistently to all patients. Our project, titled Moving Beyond Population Averages, Patient Principles for a Personalized Medicine Research Agenda, is helping us to find where these knowledge gaps are from your perspectives as patients, patient advocates, and caregivers. Together with you, we will provide direction on where the research community's emphasis should be in respect to advancing personalized medicine. As an overview, our project includes 3 phases of activities. The first is that we will work with you to develop a set of patient-centered principles and a process to advance a personalized medicine research agenda during the 4 web forums over the next year. Second, we will invite approximately 45 individuals from the patient, caregiver, research, and healthcare provider communities to an in-person roundtable in Washington, D.C., and from there, participants will take the principles you helped us develop during these web forums and formulate them into a patient-centered outcomes research agenda. And third, we will then publish the complete research agenda by the summer of 2020 in the form of a white paper. The research agenda will be publicly disseminated to inform future studies that will provide patients, caregivers, and clinicians with the evidence they need to make more informed healthcare decisions related to personalized medicine. Before moving on to the second and third phases, we are also forming an advisory committee for the project, and we encourage you all to apply. And my colleague Cynthia will talk a little bit more about this opportunity at the end of the web forum after our discussion. And before I pass it back to Cynthia, I'd like to share that this project was selected by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute to receive a Eugene Washington Engagement Award because it is intended to establish partnerships and build a community equipped to participate as partners in advancing patient-centered clinical effectiveness research. The Eugene Washington Engagement Award funding mechanism is specifically geared towards projects that encourage active integration of patients, caregivers, clinicians, other healthcare stakeholders, and integral members of the research enterprise. We're thankful to BCOI for their support, as well as the encouragement that PMC has received from them over the last 2 years to make this project possible. And now I'll pass it back to Cynthia, who will share feedback we received from you during our second web forum.
Thanks, David. And I also wanted to acknowledge many of you on the line who submitted letters of support for this project. We know that is as important to you as it is to us to see this project to succeed. So we appreciate your support over the last 8 months, but also starting before that for when we applied for this engagement award. Next, I'm going to walk through some of the feedback that we received from you on the participant survey that was circulated after the last web forum. We had close to 70 participants on that web forum, and we heard back from about a third of you. Some submitted feedback even before we circulated the web survey via the chat function, and we did catalog your feedback on that. That was largely related to some of the challenges that we had with you being able to join virtually, so we have made some changes related to that. But for those of you who took the time to fill out the survey, we do appreciate that as well. So what we found is always a good thing. We had 2 guest speakers who joined us for the last web forum, and everyone thought that their presentations and the way that they approached their projects were interesting and that they learned something that they didn't know before the web forum. So at the very least, you all took something away from that, so we were happy to hear that. The second bit of useful information we received is that participants thought that it would be helpful for PMC to more clearly state the objectives and expectations for the web forum up front. So as you'll see in the agenda, we did take that into account. We also heard from participants that the virtual discussion mechanism that we had been using in web forum number 1 and number 2 limited the opportunity to provide real-time feedback. And then we also heard that participants would like a little bit more time and opportunity for Q&A and live discussion. So we did hear you, and we've taken some steps to respond to your feedback. As I mentioned in the agenda, we did include specific objectives for the web forum, and we've organized the discussion session in the slides that you received in advance to help us achieve the objective. So our success by the end will be measured by how well we've identified areas that we would like to receive feedback from you. We decided to keep the full 90-minute web forum duration, but we decided not to have guest speakers this time. We wanted to make sure that we really allowed enough time, as much time as you wanted, for Q&A and live discussion. And you'll find that we will take pauses in between the different discussion questions, just to allow folks to come off of mute and express their opinions. So if you hear some dead silence, just allow that to be time for people to take themselves off of mute. We scheduled the web forum after polling participants to identify a convenient time that would allow greatest participation. So this was scheduled based on a doodle poll that David provided. We wanted to make sure that we had some continuity from people who participated in the last 2 web forums, and so we know that scheduling at a time that was most convenient for you would allow us to do that. And then we did change the way that you're able to join the web forum, allowing you to speak by unmuting your own line. So we hope that this will address any challenges you had last time and allow you to fully participate in the discussion that we're going to have. So here are some of the findings that we had from the last web forum. As you know, that we had participants or presentations from Mary Jane Marchizotto from Food Allergy Research and Education, and we had another presentation from Paul Gross from the Cerebral Palsy Research Network, where we looked at their models for successfully setting a research priority process as part of PCORI-funded projects. They spoke very broadly about what they did as part of their projects and what led to the success of both of their projects. And really what we took away from that is there were some tools that they employed and processes that they employed that helped them really achieve success, but there were also areas that were identified from their projects where we can learn from things that they didn't do that might lead to the success of our project. So when we asked all of you to identify the process elements of the FAIR and CPRN projects that you felt would enhance PMC's project as you understood it, the feedback that we received from you is that instead of just reaching out and selecting people who we felt should be representatives of the advisory committee, that we should use more of a structured application process to solicit nominations from all of you and also from people who you would want to nominate to sit on the advisory committee. So since then, we have reached out to FAIR and asked them to share the application that they use to allow people to nominate themselves. And we, with David's help, we have set up a page that will provide you with a link to at the end of the presentation, and you should have received it already via email, that allows you just to very briefly state your interest in participating in the advisory committee and also nominating individuals to sit on the advisory committee. So that is open until the middle of June, and we would love your thoughts on that as we move forward. The second bit of feedback that we took away from the last web forum is that it is important for us to include multiple diverse stakeholder groups on the advisory committee. And we did always intend to do that, and David ran out in his overview of the project the parties that we initially were thinking we should include on the advisory committee to make sure that we do have robust participation. But there were some specific groups that we heard from all of you that you felt were important. The most obvious ones are patients, caregivers, and their family members, patient advocacy organization representatives. From the research community, you thought that it wasn't only important for us to include academic researchers, but very specifically that we should make sure that there are outcomes researchers who are represented somehow in the advisory committee. For healthcare professionals, beyond treating physicians, you all felt it was important for us to include nurses as well as genetic counselors. So we appreciate that bit of feedback. And then also include representatives from the payer community, pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies, and also federal partners from NIH, FDA, CMS, AHRQ. So we will be sure that we keep that in mind as we move forward with selecting individuals for the advisory committee. We are also told that we should consider incorporating an online platform to further vet the information that we're developing with all of you through the web forums. And so we have looked into the service that was employed by the CPRN, and that is something that we will choose to use to move forward. And then it was important that we develop a dissemination plan in advance with the project advisory committee. Initially, we had identified some channels for dissemination of the research agenda, including publication, but there was some recognition that this would be valuable if distributed through other channels. So that will be an item for discussion with the advisory committee is what our dissemination plan is going to look like. So now we are going to move into some items that we'd like to review with you and discuss. Those of you who joined us very early for our first web forum know that we had a discussion period on that web forum, and we had a polling section where we put forward some polling questions that we asked you to help us in identifying some important areas. And we did some level setting on personalized medicine, and I know David reviewed that at the beginning of the webinar. But our definition of personalized medicine, and I'd like to go through it with you because I think we all view it as the holy grail of what we should be striving for. It's three components. It's looking at biological differences for identifying targeted treatment plans. But the second part of that is looking at it in the context of factoring in patient and caregiver values and patient and caregiver circumstances. So on web forum number 1, we received some initial feedback from you on how we should define patient and caregiver values and patient and caregiver circumstances. And I'll walk through this. And then when I walk through the first one, we'll, again, go on pause and allow you to unmute your line if you think that there are other things that we should consider. How we had defined patient and caregiver values with the feedback we received from you is that patient and caregiver values include personal priorities, religious and spiritual values, society and cultural values, including family involvement and care decisions, views around quality of life, and belief about health and personal responsibility. Do you think that we accurately captured how you, from your respective communities, would view a patient and caregiver value? And to unmute your line, hit 4 star. Okay. We'll move on. Okay. It sounds like we got that right, so we'll move on to the next. The way that we define patient and caregiver circumstances would be to include emotional state, socioeconomic status, race and ethnicity, language, ability to work, access to care, social support, cognitive abilities, attitude toward illness, personality, symptom burden, health-related quality of life, ability to consent and choose, relationship with your healthcare provider, the role of a patient as a caretaker themselves, and other expressed needs and barriers to healthcare. Does anyone think that there are other factors that should be included in patient and caregiver circumstances? And again, hit 4 star to unmute your line.
Hi, this is my first time on the call. It's Frances Beard. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, these definitions are very comprehensive. I like them.
Terrific. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Frances.
Hi, this is Kelly Shanahan. I'm wondering whether in one of these definitions we should also include values relating to financial toxicity and the decisions patients have to make whether to undergo treatment or bankrupt their families.
Great. That's definitely important, and I think that we will include that probably under circumstances, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else have feedback on the definition portion? All right. Well, if you do have thoughts on it later on, feel free to take us back to that. The conversation may lead us back in that direction, and we will have opportunity at the end for you to comment again if you'd like to make a comment about the definition. So we'll move on to the scope and content. One of the conversations we had early on, and we sort of pressure tested the idea again in web forum number 2, is where this research agenda would be most helpful and where the priorities that are identified should be focused. And we did this based on the fact that when we looked at the 3 aspects of how we were defining personalized medicine in the context of understanding biological differences, patient and caregiver values, and patient and caregiver circumstances and treatment setting, we asked you, of those 3 factors, what would you like your provider to be very emphasizing in having in that treatment decision-making component of conversations with you. And what we found was that the focus really was on ideas related to how the context can be provided to identifying and communicating the appropriate treatment plan in the context of patient and caregiver values and patient and caregiver circumstances. So we narrowed a bit further down in looking at priority areas that would potentially be focused on helping providers. And so this is what we have put forward as what we'd like our initial scope to be. The research agenda would be most helpful if it focused on priorities that help providers in identifying and communicating treatment options based on biological differences, but in that context of patient and caregiver values and understanding patient and caregiver circumstances, and presenting those treatment options in ways that highlight how treatment aligns or does not align with those circumstances. Do people first agree that this is a good approach for us to be taking as we move into the next phase of the project? Sounds like someone came off of mute, so if you'd like to say something.
Hi, it's Lisa Kennedy Sheldon. I was sorry, I was a little bit challenged on the last round.
You're fine.
I'm glad you could hear me. Hi, you can hear me now. That's great. So on the last round, I just wanted to make sure that we included physical functioning. I think really looking at, particularly ECOG functional status and understanding the impact of treatment decisions on patient functioning is often very important to patients. On the provider side, I think we have to also address issues related to health literacy and how we communicate information that helps patients make decisions that are in line with their values.
Great. And I think that would fit. We can more specifically call out issues related to health literacy under what we've identified in terms of ability to consent and choose, as well as express needs and barriers and acceptance of patients of that information. We can more specifically
yes, I would agree. And I also think there's an issue related to how providers communicate information based on how patients understand it.
Yes. I think that's what we learned a lot from web forum number 1, is even in situations where there is a clear diagnostic and targeted therapy approach, that both the timing of conversations with patients about those types of decisions, as well as how that information is communicated back, that there are challenges that I think are understood, but will likely also impact other areas where there aren't existing treatments. So that's very helpful feedback. We'll certainly consider that. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Okay. So we'll move on to talk about under this, looking at the scope of the research agenda and the content we hope it will include. We do know that providers are going to be an important audience for what we're doing, but we know that patients are being included in conversations about their treatment decision making, and at certain points, what we've identified is there are advocacy groups and other organizations who have stepped up to try to close the education gap for patients in those areas, but certainly there is probably more that needs to be done. So to what extent do you all feel that the focus of our research agenda should address education of patients directly? And would you have any sort of suggestions for how we might go about incorporating a patient education element to the research agenda, maybe something like tying it into the areas we focus on for providers, but we'll leave it open for now. We'd love to hear your thoughts on whether or not we should address patient education.
My answer is most definitely.
Great. Will not take it off the table.
Hi there, it's Jane Binger. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi Jane.
Hi there. Yeah, just a couple thoughts. I'm not sure what others think, but I'd love to see us do something related to what is effective education for patients. I don't find that that's always obvious. I like the idea of us at least having guidelines for working with patients directly, but I love the idea of doing something for patients directly. And thirdly, I'd love to see us remember that the patient of today, of course, is today, but a family member is the patient of tomorrow. And so to have an appreciation for family members working with patients in this area. Those are my comments.
Great. That's terrific. And I think, we have some groups that are included in the project that, because of they've been fortunate enough to have a number of targeted therapies and diagnostics in their space, have, I think, been put in the position of having to be that resource for patients. And so at least in those areas, we can identify someone to include in the advisory committee and also include them in the in-person meeting to help make sure that when we do have a patient education component, that we're doing that in a way that's where they've done the work and can advise us on how they've done it and how we can do it most effectively. So it's helpful.
This is Lisa Schlager with Force. Can you hear me?
Hi, Lisa. Yep.
Oh, hi. Thanks. So this is interesting because I was just at a workshop yesterday focusing on genetic and genomic medicine and patient perceptions and their understanding. And one of the things that came up was there's really just so much confusion around it. And even people who see a genetic counselor ultimately still come away with a general lack of knowledge or understanding. And so I think it's important that the idea of discussing these issues, especially when it comes to genetics and genomics and things that are not necessarily familiar to patients, that it's not a one-touch point opportunity. It's a conversation. It's a process. It's not just a one and done. And so I think that's super important here because when somebody is facing a diagnosis, they can only process so much at one time. And even their caretakers and relatives are the same. So I think, maybe we want to look at, as somebody else said, effective ways, effective methods of providing this type of education and looking at it more of as a process over time versus a one-time deal.
Yeah, that's terrific, and I think, go ahead, I'm sorry, who was next?
Oh, this is Sandra Shaw. I'm with Go-To Foundation for Lung Cancer, and I just want to weigh in as agreeing that education definitely is key, and we're collecting patient data in the registry, and one of the things that's come up recently as we consider evolving the survey is like when patients are answering questions in the registry about whether they were tested and what molecular tests they had and what their results were. We want to get a better understanding of how well do they really understand the questions that they're answering, right? So education, I think, is key, and definitely understanding how to best get the information across to ensure that they do have a good understanding of their choices and their decisions around personalized medicine, but the testing and the results from the testing and all those things.
Yeah, one of the things we discovered was that, a lot of times people are offered genetic or genomic testing, and at the time they don't opt for it, and then it's never brought up again. And, maybe they weren't in the right time or place to think about it, but there are numerous, touch points and opportunities to introduce the idea, and, it's just something to explore if you're delving into that type of education.
Hi, this is Kathy Oliver. I am a 7-year stage 4 colon cancer survivor, and I think that the education of patients is so important. It took me probably 2 years to even understand my disease, and that was from researching online and joining Facebook groups. And there's so many people with colon cancer, because those are the groups that I'm involved with, that have no idea about the genetic testing. What is MSS? I mean, the basic genetic testing. And how to put that information across to them. It needs to be really dummied down and simplified for the patient, and the patient, if the patient has already been undergoing chemo, you have to consider chemo brain, and I think in little bits and pieces it's absorbed more readily.
That's terrific, and it should never take someone 2 years to understand their disease. So we're hopeful that we can help, and appreciate you sharing that. From what I've heard so far, go ahead.
Hi, it's Lisa Kennedy Sheldon. I was just thinking, we've had a great deal of discussion, and I know recently we had a meeting at Longevity talking about, I know we have somebody on the call for talking about lung cancer diagnostics and biomarkers. There's a huge confusion, I think, at both the patient and some of the provider levels, particularly the primary care providers, on understanding what's genetic testing, which patients often read as meaning hereditary and family only, and what's biomarker testing for treatment selection. And of course, then we have that gray area where we're looking at who's going to respond and who might have adverse events based on both genetic and biomarker tests. So it's almost to the point where I think we need to separate out what's hereditary risk to help at the patient level at a very generic level, and then also talking about what are biomarkers for treatment selection. So there seems to be almost a nomenclature issue at the moment that's making it very difficult for patients and families to understand what we're doing.
That's terrific, and I know that we have had longevity as part of the last 3 conversations. So a lot of what you've talked about is weaved into, I think, what we hope to do. But what's been helpful, I think, so far in the conversation is understanding, if we do take on this issue of patient education, what aspects of it are most important for us to look for. And it sounds to me, level of communication is important. The time points of communication are also important. The way that that's communicated and how it potentially impacts families who we've heard are the patients of the future, that would also be useful as well. And then making sure that in the context of both research and treatment, that the information about what's being asked of patients, that they fully understand the types of testing that they've had, and also, how that's impacted care, and learning from what groups like Longevity has done to really parse out the different types of testing and streamlining the language around it is an area that we should learn from. Is there anything that I've left out, or anything anyone else would like to add related to patient education?
Jane Binger, no, I like the discussion. I like the direction and the key points. Just back to the last point you made, I sort of think of it as, what is it? What is something? What should the patient expect? And where to go for more resources. I think those three are real basic, really important.
We have Daryl Pritchard here, so he's gonna develop all the resources that you all need. No, but Daryl is also a part of the project, and as some of you know from working with him on our direct-to-consumer guide, has tried to do a good job of explaining the current landscape of direct-to-consumer testing, and was nice enough this time around to include a couple representatives from the patient community to allow them to share their thoughts. But if there are ways that we can either leverage resources that we have, or help to inform materials and resources that are developed in the future, I think that it's good for him to be here, and also hopefully we can learn from you on that. I did want to mention on the last definition we had a participant who could not unmute himself. So a couple of the things that we're going to consider, one is related to patient values. We did not include privacy preferences under that definition, and so that's something that I think would be important for us to include. So thank you for that feedback. We'll make sure that that's incorporated, because I think that was an oversight on our part. The second bit of feedback that person had is a consideration of family preferences. An example is that genetic data can also impact other family members, so I think that we talked about that in the context of education, but we can also consider it as part of the family considerations under both definitions. So we'll be sure to integrate that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. Oh, hi. Thank you. I'm muted myself. This is Jasmine Watson. I also wanted to add to this conversation the importance of family medical history and the importance of explaining that to newly diagnosed individuals. We need to work on that as well.
Great.
Hi, this is Jennifer Butte. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
I wanted to add one more point about patient education. When we think about communication between patients and healthcare providers, we often think about what providers can do to improve their communication, but we could also consider how patients can improve their communication. For example, giving patients tools to prepare for appointments, helping them think about how to craft questions, especially about complex diseases or testing that is new to them. So we can think about that from both sides.
That's great, and that's actually something I do want to talk about when we move later into the discussion, when we talk about how the research agenda can apply across additional disease areas. There have been a couple of considerations, and I think that was one of them that you just brought up related to, there are factors in the context of provider time and other things that are overarching irrespective of whatever disease you have or are receiving a diagnosis for. So we will talk about that a bit later, but I appreciate you bringing it up soon, because that means that we're on track to to cover what needs to be covered. So thank you, Jennifer.
Hi, Jane Binger. I think that last point's really important.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to move on. And we mentioned a little bit about financial toxicity and adding that as a special consideration under the circumstances component under definitions. But we would like to see, are there other access challenges beyond those created by a lack of communication and education that we should consider as part of the agenda. So we did talk a bit on one of the earlier web forums when we were talking about lung cancer diagnosis and treatment, about how just timely access to novel therapies impact people's outcomes. And the access could either be, the limited access could be due to a person's coverage for either the diagnostic and treatment, their provider availability, for their ability to actually go and see the providers they need to seek the diagnosis, as well as affordability. You know, once a person receives the information that they need about what treatment they have, you know, whether or not they're able to actually support that. So are there issues like those that you think should be considered? And one of the reasons why we bring it up is because it will help us with the discussion later on where we're talking about how far we should go with our research agenda, because currently cost considerations are not something in research that PCORI is looking to fund as a full research project. So it would actually sort of lead us down into a discussion of are there research priorities that we should include beyond anything that's fundable by PCORI. So I'll pause there and see if anyone has any thoughts about us addressing other types of access challenges.
Yeah, hi, this is Kelly Shanahan again. And it's certainly, if we cannot afford our medications, if it's not going to be covered by insurance, or if it's going to require an astronomical copay, that is, you know, as big an access consideration as geographic distance from a trial, racial disparities, et cetera, because none of this research is going to do us any good if we can't afford the medication.
Good point.
That was well stated, but does anyone have any other thoughts on access challenges that you hope we address? Okay. All right, well, we are going to move on from this slide, but again, feel free if there's anything that you would like to go back to later on in the discussion, we are certainly open to that. So now we are going to get into what's been one of the more challenging things for us to decide internally, and what we're really hoping for you to provide some feedback on. Initially, we hope that this research agenda would identify areas for us to recommend work in that would apply across disease areas. So we have consistently had participation through the web forum from participants from the COPD community, cancer, cystic fibrosis, lupus, diabetes, Tourette's, food allergy. We've had folks from the transplant community, those who represent liver health organizations, women's health, aging, disability groups, representatives from different communities that are looking at Hispanic, African American, Asian Pacific Islander health, as well as some providers who've actually participated on the call. And so these are areas, as I read them out, that many of you know there aren't currently targeted treatments in, but there are hopes based on research that we'll be able to do more to reach patients and their families in these communities. So we certainly don't want to limit unnecessarily to one or two disease areas, but thought we would throw it out to you to see if either we should segment out a portion of the discussion about setting the research agenda for priority disease areas, or if we should really try to keep this as broad as possible and not look at specific diseases. So we'll stop for a minute and get people's views on that. And don't be afraid to show favorites to your own disease areas. We won't hold it against you. We just want your honest opinions about it.
Hi, it's Kelly Shanahan again. I really think it should be as broad as possible. We'll bring in more constituencies and get more support that way.
And this is Lisa Schleger with Force, and I do think it's very challenging to address every single audience, potential stakeholder. At the same time, you don't want to exclude anybody. So I do think, I agree, the broader the better. You don't have to get into the specifics of specific indications or medications or conditions, but give examples and just try to explain the basics around, the science and the current treatment landscape.
Jane Binger, I agree with those comments. And also I'm wondering if we shouldn't take a look at where Personalized Medicine Coalition, where we're focusing in policy and the other areas of the coalition, in case we can, align with some of those and have even more impact in our work.
That's the plan. That is the plan, Jane. We will hopefully be able to do more around advocacy in these areas, or at least identify areas to empower others to do more as well, if we can't take it all on in our 8-person small but mighty group, as we like to call it.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Anyone else?
And just as a reminder, if you haven't, press 4* to unmute your line.
Okay. Okay. It doesn't sound like anyone's making a play for us to really emphasize any one specific disease area. So this is music to our ears, actually, to know that we should try to tackle this as difficult as it's going to be, with the lens toward across diseases. The one item I would like to bring up is based on some feedback that we took from the last web forum, is that there are some specific considerations for methods for facilitating communication that'll address some overarching problems with goal setting between providers and patients. And this gets to the earlier conversation and what Jennifer brought up related to making sure that the emphasis isn't only on the provider, but ways that we can balance that with appropriate patient education. Are there other considerations that we should be thinking about, because this will also inform who we select to be on the advisory committee, just making sure that people have knowledge of these areas. But someone on the last web forum said that we need to think about the role of technology in facilitating appropriate communication between providers, if only to get over the hurdle of saving provider time and also helping to reduce provider burden. There's no nicer way to say that, but we don't want this to be a fully automated process. But that is a consideration that we'll have someone on the advisory committee that's doing work in that area. And then one of the comments I think Jane brought up earlier was ways that we can better get information out about testing to providers where there might be a gap. And there was a specific comment that was made during the discussion portion of web forum number 2 that was related to how we can make sure that there's more rapid integration of information into accreditation programs and other types of provider resources. So that's another consideration that we noted. The last thing seems more of a policy item, but I just wanted to raise it. Someone had mentioned that with this shift to alternative payment models, that there is the hope that we make sure that any sort of new payment models don't actually penalize providers or in any other way prohibit their use of diagnostics and targeted therapy. So it's something I think we'll be mindful of, but I think by including some of the payer perspectives and other types of experts in the advisory committee, and then ultimately our in-person meeting, that we might be able to have that infused throughout. But are there other considerations that you all think that we need to consider at this point for either expertise that we should bring into the conversation on making these things a reality, or other thoughts on how you can better facilitate communication?
Hi, this is Lisa Kennedy Sheldon, and I apologize, this is my first call, but I did want to bring up the NIH Genome Research Institute and their quite large array of educational materials for both patients and providers. and wondering if we had someone on the call to represent that group.
There isn't anyone on the call, but we did have folks suggest on the last web forum that we do include NIH both on the advisory committee and also when we have our in-person meeting in 2020. So we certainly will have someone who represents that view. Thank you. They do have very good resources. Great.
Yeah. And I just to back up a moment, I think there's an opportunity to learn from the oncology world where we actually are kind of I think in some ways doing a great deal of work on the biomarker world and how most of the companion diagnostics that go along with the particular targeted therapies are, I think, happening mostly right now in the oncology world. So there might be something where you want to, if you were to focus, of course, there's others here who will have other opinions, but I'm thinking that oncology may be sort of a prototype for how we have this education and how we use that information to help patients with their decision making.
We would agree with that. And then actually on the first web forum, we're sorry we didn't have you engaged at that point in the project, but we did have a focus on lung cancer and learn from how some things have gone very well in terms of patient and provider education and settings of care where biomarker testing are being optimized, but that there are still some significant gaps. So I think we can do that moving forward.
Thank you. That's great.
It's Jane Binger. I was just wondering, since we're dealing with such a broad area, if at some point, and I'm not quite sure when that would be, we might want to just list a few things of what we're not going to do on our task force.
Jane, you continue to be a slide ahead of me. It's like you wrote them. It's great. Yeah, we are going to talk about that in a couple of minutes.
Oh, perfect.
Anyone else on the disease areas or other factors that we should consider? Okay. All right, thank you for that. That was a great discussion. So now we want to talk a bit about the impact that we hope the research agenda and what we've come to understand from a very high level of how we think this can have an impact for you and your community. So at a high level, what we've identified is that the research agenda should be holistic and identify research topics inclusive of diverse patient needs, diseases, background, experiences, including patients that are underrepresented in medical research. So we are going to use that as our overarching principle for the impact that we hope this research agenda will achieve, and all of these factors that you've asked us to consider moving forward are helping us to achieve that. But there are some other questions underneath that, and one of them Jane just raised. Is what else can we be thinking about that would lead us to have a truly successful patient-centered research agenda? Are there other parameters that you think are going to impact it, ensure that we have some impact in success once we develop it and put it out into the world? It is a lofty goal, so I would be happy to hear that that's all that we need to do to make sure that we have an impact.
Hi.
But go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, I hear you.
Oh, hi. This is Deb Hunt, and I kind of agree with the first that initially, at least, we should focus on PCORI funding. Hello?
Yes, we heard you. That's
Oh, great. I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm in my office, so it's hard to know.
Oh, you're fine. No, we totally understand. It's actually, I don't want to jinx us, but we're an hour in, and it's gone very smoothly so far. So, but yeah, that's great.
Hi, it's Lisa Kennedy Shelton. Boy, you're gonna wish I'd been on the first two calls. I was just thinking there's an increasing role for nurse navigators in helping patients get through the process of diagnosis, including biomarker testing and genetic testing. And I'm wondering with that evolving role if that isn't an area where we should be looking at as well. So nurse navigators, patient navigators, we even have peer navigators. So just something to consider.
Great. That's terrific. And one of the areas that we did identify is when we broaden out the providers that we want to have represented at the on the advisory committee and in the in-person meeting, that nurses and their role in the care team was something that's been highlighted. I think someone actually submitted some feedback on that this morning via email, so it's right on target. So thank you for confirming that.
This is Frances.
Also,
please, go ahead.
No, I was just going to finish that there are also advanced practice providers, nurse practitioners, and physician's assistants who are ordering this testing as well, who are really key, I think, in expanding the workforce and doing some task shifting so that we're better reaching all people and promoting equity.
One of the thoughts that I had, going into this is if we do decide to focus on recommendations for either research questions that we hope to be identified and funded through PCORI or, a fully fleshed out research project that we think PCORI should conduct in this area, there are going to be some very valid points that have been brought up through these discussions that we don't want to lose, but, could potentially not find their way into a research project. Does anyone see value in us, capturing some of these conversations and potentially putting out a summary or synopsis of other considerations and types of topics that we think need to be addressed, and almost use it as a roadmap to steer some of those advocacy efforts like Jane mentioned earlier? Would that be useful to all of you?
Yeah, I think it's Jane. I think the idea of a roadmap would be very useful. And then the second point I wanted to make is in my education and coaching, I deal with a lot of underrepresented minorities, and I don't know how it affects this, but I know there's a lot of attention on Hispanics, African Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Native Americans, who I deal with a lot. And I don't know how it affects or does not affect. I just know that there's huge attention on that right now.
Okay. Great.
So what I was going to say is that I think it's really hard ever to put parameters around priorities on research like this, but it is important perhaps to look at those, to state the priorities that PCORI can fund, but, and this is probably the obvious thing, that any research, of course, would say what the limitations were, and would perhaps we can have some recommendations that if there are some priorities that surface as we move along, that of course we would put them out there for consideration for other organizations to fund.
That's great. And just to ask an additional question on that, because this will likely to go to whether we decide to segment out the recommendations we make in one summary of what we think PCORI should think about and fund, and then other, like a roadmap idea that I was talking about earlier. Or should we, within the same research agenda that we're going to put out in one document, sort of frame out what we think PCORI can fund, and then other types of recommendations that we would recommend for funding? So if we identify a project to be more of something that NIH should consider, that we should include a section of our research agenda that was focused primarily on projects that other federal agencies should consider funding, and then potentially another area where we can identify something that would be more aligned with a public-private partnership, or something that a private pharmaceutical company, diagnostic company, or foundation can take on. Does anyone have any thoughts on sort of how that, strong feeling one way or the other on how we should consider approaching it? we'll give a bit more thought to that. There was a suggestion that came in online, and we're not exactly sure what part of the discussion it fits into, but we thought it was important to raise it. Someone raised that online that we should consider including informed consent, particularly user-design components involved in e-consenting, universal consent for research participation. And then there was agreement online. We'll certainly, when we think of our advisory committee, we'll think of someone who's done some work in that area, but was there a specific area of the discussion where that person wanted to fit that in? It would just be helpful for us in structuring how we incorporate it beyond the advisory committee. Okay. Just type it in the chat box if you can't join on the line. Okay, and there was the question, and I think we can take that now, about is there something that we should choose not to focus on as we move on with the project? Should something not be included in the research agenda? And Jane, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that or anyone else, but would love to hear that.
Hi, it's Jane Binger. I'm not sure what they are. I just know that sometimes it can be really helpful to state what they are that we're not doing. But right now I'm not clear on what it would be. So I would defer to my colleagues on the call for thoughts on that, and for you all, because you work this world all the time.
Yeah. And what I think we can do is, we are going to take all this feedback that we got from you now and distill it, and it'll be a bit of the basis for the final web forum we have. And perhaps based on all that we took in today and anything that people submit between now and that last web forum, that could be the place for us to decide what's in or out. That might be a good conversation to have. So we're not stepping into anything we shouldn't be. And there was clarification on that point about e-consenting, and that it should be a part of the conversation or anything that we identify that's related to patient comprehension.
I guess one thing I was thinking is there something that if we don't do it now, is a time-bound question. Is there something if we don't do it now, we hurt our chances of having successes 5 to 10 years from now? And I don't know what that is, but that would be one way of looking at it.
Yeah. It's a provocative and important discussion to have, I think. No pressure on the project, though, for sure. That would be interesting. Yeah, I think we should put it on the agenda for the next web forum. Okay. Does anyone else have any thoughts on any of these questions or anything that we've talked about so far?
And as a reminder, press 4* to unmute your line if you haven't done so already.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, we just wanted to talk a little bit about the next steps. As an immediate step, we will post the webinar recording and these slides, and they're going to be available on PMC's website in the next couple of days. And for those of you who weren't able to participate on the previous web forums, we talked through a lot of what was covered, but we didn't obviously go over the individual guest presentations. If you want to take the time to go back, we do have them on the website. We would encourage you to listen to those at your leisure, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have based on that discussion that we had on those web forums. We are going to take all the feedback that you gave us today, and thank you so much for being so generous and offering so much of your time. And we are going to finalize what we'll consider our principles and sort of the parameters that we're going to use moving forward into the next phase of the project. If you have any additional suggestions on the in-person meeting that we're planning on this project, the target time frame that we're going to have for our final webinar when we talk about all of this is going to be in January of 2020. So there is some time, but as we found with this project, what seems like a lot of time is actually not a lot of time. So as you have suggestions, please feel free to reach out to me or to David and plan to join us on that webinar. You're going to receive an evaluation survey for this web forum, and we've tried to do our best to incorporate all the feedback that you've provided on how we can make each one of these better. And despite some technological challenges we've had on the first couple of programs, we have gotten a sense from you that everything that we've done to address your concerns has made these better over the last 8 months, so thank you for helping us improve. And then we did mention a bit about the Project Advisory Committee. If you have any questions about what would be expected of you as part of the advisory committee, please feel free to, again, reach out to me or to David. We'd be happy to answer any individual questions you have about that. But until June 21st, we are accepting nominations, and the nomination form link is included in the slides. You can just go ahead. It's a very brief SurveyMonkey that asks you a few questions about yourself and why you'd like to be involved in the advisory committee. We also do have the ability for folks to nominate individuals for the advisory committee. We just hope that you tell them in advance that you're doing it. But, you know, as I mentioned earlier, there are some specific groups of people that we'd like to include in the project based on feedback that we've heard from you. So if you do have suggestions on anyone in the nursing space who would have particular insights on this, please feel free to let them know and nominate them, as well as genetic counselors, outcomes researchers, and other academic researchers. If you have patients, if you are a patient, if you're a caregiver, if you have ambassadors for your organization who you think would be a good fit for this, please go ahead and nominate them, as well as you know, people from the payer community. What we've been finding is we have contacts in the payer community, but there are payers who are thinking uniquely about integrating personalized medicine. So if you know of a particular individual who is at a payer organization who would be useful, provide useful contributions to this discussion, we would love to have you nominate that person. And then we will include government officials, and got some good notes today on folks, particularly from NIH, who you think should be considered. But again, please feel free to participate. We have gotten a few applications, and we're hoping for more. So, you know, reach out to us again if you have any questions, or just go ahead and complete the survey. So that actually concludes the program that we had. Does anyone? We have some time left. If anyone has anything they'd like to raise, or okay, someone actually did have another thought on comorbid conditions. That is something, because we have included a couple of advocacy groups who represent communities who tend to present with comorbid conditions. We think that that is something that we will address and make sure that we have a representative on the advisory committee who can speak to that, because we know that conditions don't operate. Nobody, particularly as they get to older age, has just one condition, so that will be a factor. And I know that the providers will have some thoughts on that as well.
Jane Binger, I just wanted to say I think you and David did a great job, and I'm really impressed by the comments of my colleagues on the call. I see it's a brain trust and a lot of dedication. It's a real honor to be on this group.
Well, thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks. I know we all feel the same way, and we're fortunate to have you and everyone who gave their time to participate, and we're just really excited for this. I think we should end on that high note. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way. But again, thank you all for your time, and you will be receiving a number of emails from me and from David. And if you have others who you think should be included in the project, not just on the advisory committee, but would just have thoughts, now that you know how we're sort of narrowing down our focus on this project, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.